I'm going to show you how to make an operating car work anywhere you want to on a layout. Here's the bill of materials for this project. You'll need some balsa wood strips, about 1/4 of an inch wide and maybe 3/32 thick. You'll also need some brass strip like this one. It's about 1/16 thick and 1/4 of an inch wide. The other things you'll need are some wire. You'll also need a push button switch. Any momentary type push button switch will be good. The tools you'll need will be an X-Acto knife, a double cut file, and some CA glue and accelerator. You'll also need a soldering gun and some solder. We're using Gargrave's track here as an example, but this project will work on anyone's track that does not have metal ties. Once you know where the spot is on the layout where you want this car to work, let's tip the car over, and using a felt tip pin, we're going to make a mark on the rails where the wheels of the car were, or approximately where they were, when you want this car to dump. Okay, that tells us that we're going to mount 2 rails. One on this side of the center rail for this truck and this hot shoe, and it doesn't need to be exactly in this area. We need to make it a little bit longer than this area so that we don't have to stop the car exactly on that spot. And another rail on that side of the center rail for this shoe. And once again, it will be a little bit longer too. So let's get a piece of our balsa wood, and we'll mark it about that long. And let's do it twice. Then we'll get a piece of the brass, and we'll mark it for about this long, twice. And those will be our cut points. I'm going to use a Dremel tool to cut this. You can use a hacksaw, but I just want to speed the process up a little bit. We need to knock this tip and corner off. Just round it down so that when the car's operating shoe comes up to this point, it will just slide up this incline and fit right on the rail. Notice that I'm only using a file in one direction. A file is not like sandpaper. You can't run one way and then try to come back. You have to go one direction only. There. Now that looks pretty good, but we've got a sharp edge. So I'm going to take the file and just smooth down the edge a little bit too, so that there isn't any knife edge point that could cut the plastic. There, that's smooth. And we'll do the same thing to the other side. When you get finished filing the brass pieces, they should look like this. The first thing we're going to do is locate the balsa wood strip on the tops of the ties right where we want the brass hot rail to go. Now, as you can see here, I've trimmed the balsa wood so that it doesn't overshadow the ends of the ties, because that balsa wood's going to stay there. We're going to paint it black so it kind of goes away. But if it hangs over the edge of the ties, it'll show up really bad. Let's take a knife and just push it into the balsa wood and use it for a handle, and we'll remove it like this. And we'll put some CA glue right on that strip. There we go. Then we'll position it on the ties. And spray it with our accelerant. There we go. And do the same thing with the other one. And notice that when I put this back on the ties, I'm placing it up against the center rail, not up against the outside rail. Place it up against the base of the center rail. That gives you the exact spacing you need to position the brass hot rail. Now we're going to solder a wire to this brass rail and drill a hole and feed that wire down through the track. But before we mount the rail, it's a good idea to solder the wire first so that you can get a line up to show between which ties you're going to make the hole. So we'll just make a dot there and here, and that tells us that this will be positioned correctly when the wire goes through the hole. Now we're going to tin the brass first. We're going to add some solder to the brass and then solder the wire to it. So this brass is going to conduct heat all the way down the length of it, so it will take a while to heat it up. First thing we want to do is just scrape off the surface of the brass right where we made our mark. That'll give us some nice, fresh, untarnished brass to solder to. Okay, let's put some heat on the brass, and this will take a little while because it takes quite a while to heat up that much brass so that the solder will finally adhere to the brass. At first, when you start this, the solder is going to flow very, very easily onto the tip of the soldering gun, but leave the gun there until it can spread some of that heat to the brass strip. There we go. Should look like that. Mark the second piece of brass the same as you did with the first one so that you can locate between the ties where the hole is going to be drilled, and repeat the procedure that you did with the first piece of brass. Using a 20 or 22 gauge wire, strip about 1/8 of an inch away and tin the tip of the wire the same as you did the brass strip. And then solder the wire to the brass. And once again, this will take a while because you have to heat up quite a bit of metal until both of them flow. There we go. I've used two different colors here because I want to be able to tell which one is which when I get underneath the layout. I'm going to drill a 1/8 inch diameter hole right on the mark we made between the ties, right through the table. Before we use the CA to mount the brass hot rail, look and make sure that no glue has slipped out from underneath the balsa strip that we put in, and in this case it has. You have to remove that first because if you don't, it'll cause the brass hot rail to sit up too high. So I'm just going to take a knife and chip this glue out so that we have a nice square corner down in there for the brass hot rail to sit. There, that looks much better. Now we'll feed the wire down through the hole that we drilled. All right, that's how it's going to be up against that balsa wood strip. So now we can bring this over, put some CA glue along where it's going to go on each tie, like this. Now position the rail and hold it against the balsa wood because it has to snuggle flat up against that balsa wood. And while you hold it in place with a knife or some other tool, spritz it in place so that, there we go. Now that'll hold up in place so we can finish the rest of it. These are my transformer leads, and I'll put the common lead on here. And I'll put the hot lead right here. And let's see what happens. There we go. So installing these hot rails in this manner lets you make a dump site anywhere on your layout you want. Isn't that great? You can use anybody's paint, flat black paint, but I'm using Polyes's water-based paint here. And we'll just get some on a brush. We don't have to be careful about this. We're just going to swab it all over here on the brass, on the glue on the edge of the brass that looks so ugly. There we go. Now you may look at that and say, well, he just covered up the area that the electricity has to get to. That's easy. Once you're done with that, you just wipe it off with your finger like that. I'm glad you could be with us. We'll see you next time.